Welcome back to our second module in this Yellow Belt orientation, or the quest for continual improvement. And what we're going to talk about here is learning how work is done in processes. So at the very beginning of the total quality movement back in the 1970s, there was an aphorism that said that all work is done in processes, all processes can be measured, and if you reduce variation in the process, it will improve. Well, that's fine and dandy, but we don't really see work as processes, and it's difficult for many people to understand the process nature of work. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by work and what we mean by process. So let's begin with this question: what is the nature of work? So work is purposeful expenditure of energy to achieve movement. So if I'm sitting in a room and I'm actually working and doing something, you can see I have movement. So energy is being expended. However, if I'm lying on a couch with my eyes closed, there's no work happening. So what do we mean by work? So objects at rest are not working, as their energy is potential energy. Energy could be happening, but it's not kinetic. It's not actually moving. It's not being acted upon. So when energy is acted upon, movement occurs. When movement is achieving its objective or purpose, then work is being achieved. So if we take a look at our body as a system, my heart is pumping, the lungs are breathing, the digestive system is flowing, and so forth. That means work is happening in the body. And so energy is actually being consumed. And if I want to expend more energy, I move more. That's why exercise is important. So the quality of the achieved result of movement represents the effectiveness, efficiency, and economy of the work that has been achieved. So the quality question is, does the work meet its purposeful objective? So if the purposeful objective is to store energy, then I don't want to work. I want to rest. If the purpose is to become in a better physical condition so more work can be done, then I have to push the body or the system so that it can actually achieve more work in the future, so it gets accustomed to doing that level of output. Now, when we apply this to work in our industry, we see that much of industry is a transformation that's been happening over the last basically century. And the nature of work has changed from a dominance of craft work to mostly process work. So craft work, we see the human is calibrated to become the measurement system. If I'm blowing glass, for instance, my body is moving the glass rod. My breath is blowing in to put the air in. I'm calibrating how I put the glass above the flame to get it to the right temperature. All natures and judgments are made about production were made subjectively by the individual, and they became the master craftsman by building experience from, first of all, an apprentice to a journeyman to a craftsman to a master. And people do this type of work, craft work. Process work is where we see automated systems that can perform repetitive work without getting tired or changing the quality level. So this is the automated production line, like a bottling line filling bottles. So we have first bottle sterilization, and then we have the filling of the bottle, we have the capping of the bottle, we have the label application, and then we have the packaging. So at each of those rates, we see there is a constant process of delivery. So as long as the process has been designed to do that properly, it will be successful. And this type of work is done in systems. And those systems can also include people. But the quality of the work depends more on the proper functioning of the equipment, whereas the proper functioning of the equipment occurs because the people have set it up right and maintained it right, and that they are feeding the right type of materials in to make that work. So people become the support system for processes in that type of case. So in a business system, we see that a business is operated to fulfill a purpose. Every business has a business charter. The charters are granted by states to fulfill a particular role in society. So my company is filling a role of providing training and consulting on business improvement. We have a system of activities around that purpose that deliver the results. And the operating model then is saying how those systems of processes deliver the result. So it organizes the work within our business to achieve the purposeful aim of the organization. So operating models provide then an explanation for how things work in the daily management system. So the work that we do on a day-to-day basis has to fulfill that purposeful aim of the organization. If it does not, then it's waste. So we see a productive system like this has 4 components. First of all, there's mechanisms of production, hardware and software systems. Second, there's a human component, both in the design of that system and the execution of the system. Third, there are information components that define the knowledge base by which the system operates. And that can include the human skills and competence, as well as the algorithms that are built into information systems. And fourth, there's data collected which informs this system about how well it's operating and allows us to operate feedback loops that keep the system in a state of control. So that provides information to steer this system to better decisions in the future. Now, Richard Young is a psychologist at London University College, and he describes the way a system works as a cognitive system. He says it's a collection of if-then rules that together form an information processing, computer simulation model of some cognitive task or range of tasks. A production system operates by means of a recognized act cycle in which the rule whose condition is satisfied is identified and its actions taken. So the rule is, what are we going to do to produce this outcome? The actions taken produce the outcome, and then we satisfy the objective of that system. Now, what's interesting is this is the same definition for a manual system or an artificial intelligence system. The words artificial intelligence were actually created by Herbert Simon in the 1960s. And he was the first one to bring forward these terms in terms of how do cybernetic systems, so the computer, man-machine interfaces, work together, and how can machines start making decisions that people normally would have in the past. And so as we start taking a look and say, what are the components of work? So what goes into building work? Well, first there are requirements. What has to get accomplished? There's innovation. How is this work different from other choices? You might have competitors or alternative sources. Design. How do we create the difference between our work and that of others? And that is the choice we make about what we're going to put into the content of that work. Reliability. How can we ensure that this lasts for a reasonable amount of time compared to the expectations of the customers? Finance. What's the investment required to produce this value? Capacity. How much can we produce? Safety. Are the workers protected from harm and hazards? And are the users protected also from any hazards? Competence. What's the skill set required and the level of performance required of the people working in this system? Productivity. How much volume of production is required? Quality. What has to be the output level of operations when we put it into its actual intended environment? And capability. How much operating loss is reasonably sustainable? So what is the amount of process that we designed in terms of capability, and what are we actually achieving? And how much loss is the difference between the design potential and the achieved performance of the system? So all of these are things we can make judgments on, things we could measure and analyze or evaluate as we analyze work. We also see that there's maintenance. How do we prevent breakdowns in the systems? Satisfaction. How do people feel about it, either employees, customers, or owners? And information is the ability of this information to permit the organization to manage itself. Does it have integrity? And finally, teamwork. How well do we work together to achieve all of these results? So this is what we mean by this. If we observe each of these components of work, they operate very differently across the 3 levels of the organization, from the front line to the executive function. So again, not one size fits all. And so as we start taking a look, there are many different types of flows in the organization. There could be a physical flow. There could be an asset flow of production equipment moving. It could be a logical flow, data, information. a human flow, the development of competence and capability in people, a financial flow, cash coming in response to invoices, or investments coming in and being spent on capital equipment. It could be a conceptual flow, how we develop a mental model, or how we develop innovations in the future, or an authoritative flow about the decision-making rights and accountability of the organization. So workflow helps to create productivity in a variety of dimensions. And if I take a look at this business level, we see that each of the three levels of the Gemba that we have is actually operating in different ways. At the operational level, we're performing the daily work. That's a daily management system. At the cross-functional level, we're performing change management. We're distributing critical resources and decision rights to make the business system work more effectively and efficiently. At the leadership level, we're seeking resources to achieve the business purposeful aim, and we're allocating resources to best achieve the overall system's improvements. So each of these levels has different challenges to work that business system. So what do you want to accomplish? Deming made the comment, he said, if you do not know how to ask the right question, you will discover nothing. Sounds an awful lot like Drucker, doesn't it? So what do you need to know to do that? How will you know what you need to do? By what means will you satisfy yourself that you have learned? And how should you set your targets? These are questions that we need to be able to answer if we really want to accomplish the strategic goals of an organization. And so we have a process. The process has suppliers. These are people who are providing inputs. The process is what we work on, the transformation, how we turn inputs into outputs, and then the outputs are delivered to customers. And so we start seeing that if we don't get the output right, we can have excuse making or negotiated settlements. I'm sorry, we didn't deliver what you wanted, Mr. Customer, but we'll give you a price discount. But it will take it back and we'll give you an exchange for the product. So we have some negotiated settlement. If we don't get the input rights, then what we do is we go into blame casting, telling the supplier, you did this wrong, you did this right. We want reparations, give us money back because you cost us money. And so as we start taking a look at these processes, this is what we see legacy thinking. This is the old style of thinking, how to work in business. These are no longer appropriate mechanisms for building our relationships with customers or suppliers. And there are 4 rules of process performance. All work is accomplished in an interconnected series of work processes. We have to connect the processes together so they flow. Performance varies over time and variation can be measured. That means we have to have an integrated measurement system that we build. It can't be haphazard. We can't just allow it to happen by chance. Third, sources of variation are discoverable through analysis methods. That means we have to build the analysis methods into the system by which we collect the data and report it to management. And fourth, reducing variation improves processes so they can become both stable, in other words, give us a result that we can count on, and predictable. That means that we can understand what level of performance will happen if we change the inputs. So what is your level of process performance? How much do you know? How does your process really flow? We might carry in our mind a mental model of what we believe a process to be, and we think it's this. Now, when we actually take a look at what it's actually doing and we see there's much more complexity to it. And when we see what we would like it to be, we want it to be more simple even than the mental model that we were carrying along. And so the question is, how do we get there? Well, we eliminate waste by removing non-value adding activities. That's the fundamental principle in Lean. So Lean enterprise management is about removing unnecessary activities, things that cause waste, things that cause loss, things that cause leakages in materials and so forth. All of those are things that are bad in the system. And so as we look at how do we do this investigation, we see that we're going to follow sort of these 5 steps. We're going to map the process. We're going to measure the process. We're going to mine it to find out what are the relationships occurring. We'll modify it to see what are the things we can do to improve, and then we'll maintain that new performance of those activities. So process thinking is basically saying four things. We want to understand the components of work and how the work actually flows. We want to identify critical process measures and performance levels. We'd like to discover sources of variation within each activity as well as between the activities. And we'd like to seek solutions that minimize variation for the critical process measures. Now, what I want you to do is, in your organization, you can form a group and have a discussion about what do we mean about critical core processes. So what are your critical core processes? So I might make my choice based on my background, and as an engineer, I might have it more technical. I might not think about the financial core processes. I might not think about marketing core processes or human resource core processes, but I might have pretty good understanding of the technical core processes. But how about the supporting administrative processes? How do you distinguish between these two and the different roles that they play in your daily management system? Are there any differences either in degree of stability required or the need for standardization of those two? This is a conversation that management teams need to have at each level in the organization. The core business process is what we typically think about. The supporting administrative processes are those processes that enable us to get that core process done efficiently and effectively, and that account for or allocate the financial performance for that process. Now, typically when we're building a system, we will go through it in a series of cycles of improvement. The very first cycle we take a look at, we've called this in the orientation program, Genichi Genbutsu, go to the Gemba. Go look and see. When we go that very first time, all we're doing is understanding. So the first cycle is about understanding the individual ways things work. After we've done that, the second cycle of improvement means we can document it. We actually have seen it, we understand it, we can document it. After we've documented it, we now have a basis to simplify. Don't simplify without documenting, because we won't know what we are actually documenting or simplifying. So document and then simplify. And this is all following routine standard work or creating routine standard work. So there's at least 3 cycles of learning that are necessary to build up this understanding. And the way we do this is we'll do this by understanding the macro flows of the organization, from supplier, the inputs to our process, what goes on inside our process, what are the key performance indicators that are critical to quality in terms of what's happening from the output of our process to the customers, and then what is critical to satisfaction as the key performance indicators of our customers. And we can build this up and include it as a value stream map. So here's a draft sort of look of how this would be if we created this sort of concept. So this is a fundamental tool in Six Sigma, but it's basically the same as ISO 9000's context diagram. So we identify all of our suppliers, what are the inputs we get from each to our process, and then the process is specified, those are the activities down below with the yellow boxes. What are the outputs of our process, what's critical to quality about what we do, which customer they go to, and then what's critical to satisfaction to those customers. And across those yellow boxes down below, we can have how much productivity do we get right the first time in each of those process boxes. And when we multiply those together, we get rolled throughput yield. Rolled throughput yield is that indication of what went right the first time from one end of the process to the other. And the surprising thing is, if I have a process with 5 steps, and I start seeing that each one is at 90%, okay, then that does not mean that I have a 90% throughput for the process. It means 90% went through the first time right, then 90% of that 90% went through the second time still without being touched. That's only 81%. If I have 90% of the third one, that's 72%. 90% of the fourth one is 63%. 90% of the fifth one is 56%, I think, 54%, and so forth. So by the time I've got a 5-step process, each one operating at 90% correct, the overall outcome has had lots of rework hidden in the process. And each time we repair, we have an opportunity to create reliability problems because we might be creating more problems than we had in the past. So we need to think about what is it that we're actually doing. And so we have another team reflection. This is how well do you know your work? Can you actually create that SIPOC map that provides that high-level view of the organization, what you're doing, as well as the high-level view of the activities and calculates that rolled throughput yield? And can we expand this P, the process, into the microprocesses that describe the overall value stream that creates the deliverables of your organization? So you might think about how would you fill in a graphic that does these sorts of things. So the sequence of activities following this quest is, how do we achieve operational excellence? So step one is assess, where are we today? Once we get that SIPOC map, we ask ourselves, what are we doing? Where do we see weaknesses? Second, target, where do we want to be? What is the right level of performance? And we'll talk a little bit about measurement and so forth, and how do we set targets appropriately as we go on in the videos. But basically, we'd like to have some sort of quantifiable goal so people can measure themselves and say, are we making improvements in the right direction? Third is reject. Abandon legacy thinking. Don't think we can do things the same old way and still get a different result. Einstein said insanity is doing the same thing the same way and expecting improvement. It doesn't happen. And finally, apply. Apply this process improvement way of working that we're going to be talking about, that it's going to take us to a different level of performance. What do you need to learn and apply? What do you need to manage well? How do you do administrative processes operated? How do you measure those administrative processes? How do you read and interpret the measures that you have? How do you consolidate operational measures into strategic measures? What are administrative wastes in the process? How do you manage the human competence? And how do you set audacious but achievable targets? These are all steps in this process that we have to learn how to make continual improvement operate really well as a system. So again, thank you very much for your listening in this second module. And we're going to now take a brief pause, and we'll come back with the third module in this video series of 8.